He thought it was just a silly bet, but living with the girl everyone mocked would change the way he saw the world forever. John had always considered himself lucky, the kind of guy who never hesitated to take risks. Friends admired his confidence, though some quietly thought he sometimes took it too far. That night, he was at a party filled with laughter, music, and the usual chatter of people trying to show off. It was one of those warm evenings when everyone seemed a little bolder, a little more careless. John was surrounded by his friends, joking about who among them was the bravest, most daring, and of course, the most foolhardy. The conversation shifted to Dares, and John, never one to back down, insisted he was the bravest among them. Everyone laughed, teasing him, but John smiled. Soaking in the attention, then someone mentioned a girl from their town. Mia, she wasn't part of their usual circle. And everyone had a story about her, stories filled with laughter and mockery. They called her weird, odd, even a little strange, pointing out her unusual habits and interests. John had met her briefly before, and though he had never paid much attention, tonight, in the heat of the playful teasing, someone suggested a bet if John was really as brave as he claimed. He wouldn't mind spending a week living with Mia if he lost. He would have to go and stay with her for an entire week. Everyone laughed louder, imagining the discomfort he would face. John felt a mix of pride and challenge. Pride, because he was sure he could handle anything, and challenge, because he hated admitting defeat. The bet, though light-hearted on the surface, had an almost magnetic pull. It was the kind of situation where backing down would mean losing face, and John could never do that in front of his friends. So, he accepted, agreeing with a grin and a shrug, pretending it was nothing, while deep down, a small flutter of uncertainty stirred. Over the next few days, the reality began to sink in. At first, John told himself it was just a silly game, a momentary adventure. But as the day approached to move in, he started thinking about Mia in ways he hadn't before. He recalled the rumors, the snickers, the whispers he had overheard. Everyone in town seemed to think she was an outsider, someone to be laughed at. And now, John was about to live with her. For a moment, he questioned his own courage. Could he handle it? Could he endure a week surrounded by someone everyone else mocked? The thought made him uneasy, but he pushed it aside, reminding himself that it was just a bet, a temporary challenge, when he finally arrived at Mia's house. The first thing that struck him was how different it was from what he had imagined. It was a small, cozy home filled with books, art supplies, and odd little collections of objects that made little sense at first glance. Mia opened the door with a quiet smile, completely unbothered by his arrival, as if it was completely normal for strangers or people who lost bets to show up at her doorstep. John felt awkward immediately, aware of every step he took, every glance he made. It wasn't just her home. It was entering a world he didn't understand, a world full of rules and rhythms he hadn't learned. The first few hours were the hardest. John struggled to find common ground, fumbling through small talk and polite gestures. Mia didn't seem offended or overly welcoming. She just existed in her own space, moving gracefully through her routines, absorbed in things John couldn't yet comprehend. He realized quickly that this wasn't going to be a simple challenge or a funny story to tell his friends later. This was something entirely different, something real. The girl everyone mocked had a presence that made him pause, a quiet strength that he hadn't anticipated. As the evening went on, John noticed small details. How Mia laughed softly to herself when she painted, how carefully she organized her books, the way she spoke about her passions with a depth and sincerity that seemed foreign to him. It was nothing flashy, nothing that demanded attention, yet it was captivating. He started to feel something unfamiliar, curiosity mixed with a hint of respect. The more he observed, the more he realized that his initial assumptions, shaped by gossip and shallow judgments, were probably wrong. Mia wasn't just strange or weird. She was simply herself, unapologetically and honestly, and somehow that made him feel both uncomfortable and intrigued. John spent that first night trying to fall asleep, thinking about the day ahead. He wondered how he would survive the week, imagining awkward moments, uncomfortable conversations, and the laughter of his friends when they heard the story. But beneath the anxiety, there was a spark tiny realization that this week might be more than a bet. Maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something unexpected. For the first time in a long time, John wasn't thinking about pride or bravado. He was thinking about understanding, about seeing someone truly different and figuring out what lay beneath the surface. By the end of the night, John knew that this bet, this silly challenge born out of bravado, had already started to change him. It wasn't just about losing or winning anymore. It was about stepping into someone else's world, a world that was real, complex, and far richer than he could have imagined. The week ahead felt daunting, yes, but also strangely promising. And as he drifted into a restless sleep, he couldn't help but wonder, what truths would he discover by living with a girl everyone mocked? How might it change the way he saw the world? And more importantly, himself. John woke up on the first morning in Mia's house with a strange mix of curiosity and nervousness. The room he was given was small but neat, with sunlight streaming through the window and casting patterns on the floor. It was far from the flashy rooms he was used to, but there was a quiet charm to it. He could hear Mia moving around in the kitchen, humming softly to herself. The sound was strangely comforting, and also made him acutely aware that he was now sharing a space with someone he barely knew. Someone who had been the subject of so much gossip and ridicule in their town. When he finally came down, he saw Mia preparing breakfast with remarkable focus. Her movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic, as if each action carried meaning. John tried to make small talk, awkwardly commenting on the weather, the house, and the neighborhood. Mia responded politely, but didn't offer much beyond short answers. Her calm, unhurried nature frustrated him at first. He was used to people trying to impress him or react quickly to his jokes, but gradually he noticed something. There was no pretension in her behavior. She wasn't performing for him or anyone else. She was simply being herself, completely an unapologetic ally. As the day went on, John began to explore the house and its surroundings. Mia had a garden at the back, small but bursting with life. Flowers, herbs, and vegetables grew in neat little plots. She showed him how she tended to the plants, explaining each one with patience and care. John watched, fascinated, as Mia moved with confidence and purpose in her space, showing him a world he had never paid attention to before. Her life, though quiet and different from his own, seemed full of meaning and thoughtfulness. He realized that this girl, whom everyone mocked for being odd, had a rhythm, a system, and a dedication that most people never saw. The first day wasn't just about observing Mia. It was also about learning how to coexist. John quickly discovered that living with someone meant adjusting to habits and routines that were unfamiliar. Mia had her own rules, small, reasonable things like washing dishes immediately after meals, keeping certain areas tidy, and respecting quiet times. At first, John found it restrictive and annoying. He was used to doing things his way, without thinking about how it affected others. But slowly, he began to see the value in her orderliness. It wasn't about control. It was about respect and consideration. Lessons he hadn't learned in the carefree chaos of his own life. Mia, for her part, was patient. She never made him feel unwelcome, even when he stumbled over her rules or made clumsy mistakes. She answered his questions with kindness, never mocking or scolding him. John found that this was unusual, as people, he thought, would have laughed at him for being so out of place. But Mia treated him like an equal. The first day ended with a quiet dinner where they shared small stories about their lives. John realized that Mia's life, though simple and solitary, was rich with experiences, thoughts, and emotions he had never considered. The girl everyone mocked was far more interesting and intelligent than he had ever imagined. Over the next few days, John began to settle into the routine. He helped Mia with household chores, went to the market with her, and even assisted in the garden. Each task, simple as it seemed, became a lesson in observation and patience. John noticed how she treated people outside their home with respect, even when they were unkind to her. She didn't fight back or show anger at the mockery. She simply continued living her life with dignity. John had never met someone so unaffected by public opinion, and it challenged his own attitudes. He started to question the way he and his friends had judged her. realizing that their laughter and ridicule were shallow and unfair. One afternoon, John found Mia painting in her room. He watched her from the doorway, captivated by the way she worked. The colors, the brushstrokes, the quiet intensity was mesmerizing. She noticed him standing there and invited him in, smiling. At first he hesitated, feeling awkward, but soon he found himself drawn into her world. Mia explained the inspiration behind her work, her thoughts, her emotions. John listened, amazed at the depth she possessed. He began to understand that her uniqueness, which others mocked, was actually a source of creativity and insight. The realization was humbling. The girl he had expected to be awkward and dull was in fact brilliant in ways he had never considered. By the end of the week, John's perspective was shifting. The discomfort and awkwardness he had felt initially were giving way to admiration and respect. He started to look forward to their conversations, to learning from her perspective on life, and even to sharing small parts of his own world. Living with Mia was no longer a bet to endure. It was becoming an experience that was opening his eyes. John began to notice how easily he could be mistaken in his judgments, how often he had laughed at people without understanding them. The experience also brought unexpected personal growth. John became more patient, more observant, and more aware of his own flaws. He realized that living with someone different required empathy and understanding, and that these qualities were far more valuable than pride or bravado. Mia, without even trying, was teaching him lessons he had never learned in school or among his friends. The quiet, small moments watering plants, sharing meals, painting together, were shaping him in ways he hadn't anticipated. By the time the week was over, John had formed a connection with Mia that went beyond the bet. It was a friendship built on mutual respect, understanding, and shared experiences. He had come expecting discomfort and embarrassment, but he left with something far more meaningful: insight into another person's world, a challenge to his own assumptions, and a growing admiration for someone he had once dismissed. John realized that this short week had changed him more than he could have imagined. What had begun as a foolish bet among friends had turned into an eye-opening journey into empathy, humility, and respect. Living with Mia, the girl everyone mocked, had taught him lessons he would carry for the rest of his life. It wasn't just about enduring the experience. It was about growing from it, understanding the depth of people beyond their appearances, and realizing that sometimes the most unexpected encounters are the ones that shape you the most. John had been living with Mia for a few days now, and something about the way she carried herself began to intrigue him more deeply. He noticed the subtle ways she approached life's small details that most people ignored, but which revealed a depth and strength he had never expected. For instance, Mia had a habit of writing in a notebook every morning. At first, John thought it was just a diary, something ordinary, but as he watched her one day, he realized she was documenting her thoughts, ideas, and reflections with incredible clarity. There was a method to it, a way she organized her feelings that made even the most complicated emotions seem manageable. It fascinated him. One afternoon, John was helping Mia sort through some old boxes in her room. Among the clutter, he discovered sketches, journals, and letters that revealed her creativity and intelligence. There were drawings that captured emotions in a way words never could, and notes filled with reflections on books she had read, ideas she had about the world, and plans for projects she hoped to one day complete. John realized that Mia had a rich inner life full of passion and insight that no one had bothered to understand. All the mockery from the townspeople now seemed shallow and cruel. This girl, who they laughed at for being weird, was quietly extraordinary. Mia noticed John's surprise and smiled softly. She didn't boast or try to impress him, but she shared her experiences honestly. She told him about the difficulties she faced in school, the loneliness that came with being misunderstood, and how people's judgments often hurt more than they realized. She spoke with a calm strength that was both humbling and inspiring. John listened intently, realizing that everything he had thought about her was based on rumors and assumptions, not reality. The truth was far more compelling than the gossip. As the days went by, John began to see how Mia's uniqueness extended beyond her personal habits and interests. She had a way of noticing things that others missed. A small detail in the garden, a change in the weather, or even the mood of someone walking past her window. Mia observed it all, and she often acted with kindness based on those observations. John had never met someone so perceptive, and it made him rethink how little attention he paid to the world around him. Her life, which seemed quiet and odd from the outside, was actually full of awareness, care, and intentionality. One evening, John and Mia were sitting in the living room talking about their dreams and goals. Mia spoke about the projects she wanted to complete, the books she hoped to write, and the ways she wanted to help people in her own small way. John was struck by her clarity of thought and the passion behind her words. There was no need for her to prove herself to anyone. Her sense of purpose was internal, strong, and unwavering. John realized that her confidence came not from showing off or competing with others, but from knowing herself deeply and trusting her own path. The more time John spent with Mia, the more he noticed the contrast between her inner strength and the superficial judgments of the town. People mocked her for being different, but their laughter seemed empty compared to the substance of her life. She had faced criticism, ridicule, and isolation, yet she had not let it change who she was. John admired that resilience and felt a growing respect and even awe for her. He began to understand that true strength was not loud or boastful. It was quiet, consistent, and rooted in self-awareness and integrity. John also started to reflect on his own life. He realized that he often sought approval from others, tried to fit in, and cared too much about appearances. Living with Mia, seeing her navigate life without concern for the judgment of others, challenged him to reconsider his values. He began to notice the ways he had underestimated people and judged them unfairly. The experience was humbling, and it forced him to confront his own biases and assumptions. Mia, in her quiet, steady way, was teaching him lessons that no book or friend ever had. As the week progressed, John and Mia started sharing more personal experiences. Mia spoke about her childhood, the difficulties she faced growing up different, and the ways she had learned to cope with loneliness and criticism. John listened, often in silence, absorbing her words and the emotions behind them. He was moved by her honesty, and it made him more willing to share parts of himself he usually kept hidden. He told her about the pressures of fitting in, the challenges of being seen as confident, and the fear of making mistakes in front of others. For the first time, he felt truly understood without judgment, and it was a revelation. One afternoon, Mia invited John to join her in a small project she'd been working at a community initiative to help children in the neighborhood learn to read and explore creativity. John hesitated at first, unsure of what he could contribute, but Mia encouraged him gently. Working together, John realized how impactful Mia's quiet determination could be. She motivated him, guided him, inspired him to see that real change often comes from consistent, thoughtful actions, not attention-seeking or bravado. By participating, John began to feel the satisfaction of doing something meaningful, something beyond his usual circle of games and competitions. The discovery of Mia's true character was transformative for John. Each day he saw more layers of her personality, more evidence of her resilience, creativity, and intelligence. He began to admire her in ways that went beyond friendship. She had become a role model of authenticity, patience, and quiet strength. He realized that everything the town believed about Hertha, jokes, the mockery, the gossip, was completely wrong. Mia was not weird or strange. She was exceptional, and her life, though different from his own, had value far beyond superficial judgments. By the end of this week, John felt a profound shift inside himself. The initial discomfort of living with Mia had given way to respect, curiosity, and even admiration. He saw that he had entered her world expecting to dominate it, to assert his presence, and to endure awkwardness, but instead, he had been taught lessons in humility, empathy, and understanding. The girl everyone mocked had revealed a truth that no gossip or laughter could obscure. People are far more than what others choose to see. John realized that the experience had changed him fundamentally. He had learned to look beyond appearances, to value people for their inner qualities rather than external judgments. Living with Mia, observing her life, and discovering her true character had opened his eyes to the depth and complexity of human nature. He understood now that the laughter and mockery of others were meaningless compared to the richness of a person's true self. The girl everyone mocked had become unexpectedly the teacher he didn't know he needed, and the lessons she imparted would stay with him long after he left her home. In those quiet days, John learned that the real truth about people often lay hidden beneath layers of misunderstanding and prejudice. Mia had been judged unfairly, and he had almost joined the chorus of mockery before he saw her life with his own eyes. The revelation was powerful, unsettling, and inspiring all at once. He felt gratitude toward her for sharing her world and patience with him as he learned to navigate it. What had begun as a simple bet was turning into an experience that reshaped his understanding of life, relationships, and human dignity. John had been living with Mia for several weeks now, and the changes within him were becoming impossible to ignore. What had started as a beta challenge born from pride and bravado had slowly transformed into something far deeper. Each day he found himself observing Mia, not with judgment or amusement, as he might have at the beginning, but with curiosity, respect, and even admiration. Her life, once dismissed by the town as strange or laughable, was revealing layers of strength, creativity, and wisdom that John had never considered before. It began with small, almost imperceptible changes in John himself. He noticed that he was becoming more patient, more willing to listen, and less eager to assert his own opinions at every turn. Whereas before, he would have dominated conversations. Eager to impress or prove his point, he now found value in silence and simply watching and learning. Mia had a way of making people feel heard, even without trying, and John realized that he had rarely practiced this skill himself. He began to slow down, to think before reacting, to appreciate perspectives different from his own. The daily routines of living together also taught John lessons in humility. Sharing a home required compromise and respect for Mia's habits, which were different from his own. She preferred quiet mornings, carefully organized spaces, and a deliberate approach to daily tasks. At first, John struggled with this. He was used to a faster, more chaotic rhythm, where rules were suggestions rather than necessities. But over time, he began to see the logic and care behind Mia's approach. She wasn't controlling, she was intentional. And this intentionality, he realized, was something he had been missing in his own life. One afternoon, John and Mia worked together on a small creative project. Mia was designing handmade cards to sell at a local market, and John offered to help. At first he felt clumsy, unsure of his abilities, but Mia guided him patiently, showing him techniques and encouraging him to express his own ideas. John discovered that creating something with care, something meaningful, brought a satisfaction he had never experienced before. It wasn't about competition or recognition. It was about effort, thoughtfulness, and collaboration. He started to understand that true accomplishment wasn't measured by praise or laughter from others, but by the integrity and effort behind the work. As days turned into weeks, John's perspective on people and life itself continued to evolve. He noticed how Mia treated others, even strangers, with kindness and respect, regardless of how they behaved toward her. She didn't seek revenge for the ridicule she had faced, nor did she try to impress anyone to gain approval. Her life was guided by principles, by empathy and understanding, rather than by fear of judgment. John realized how much he had been influenced by appearances and popularity. In contrast, Mia's quiet strength and authenticity were far more admirable. He began to reflect on his own actions, questioning moments when he had been judgmental, dismissive, or self-centered. Living with Mia also challenged John's understanding of courage and resilience. He had once thought bravery was about daring feats, taking risks, or impressing others. But Mia's courage was different. She had faced years of mockery, social exclusion, and misunderstanding. Yet she had never allowed it to harden her heart or diminish her curiosity. She approached life with honesty, creativity, and determination, even when the world around her was unkind. John recognized that this quiet resilience was far more powerful than the bold gestures he had once admired in himself. It was a lesson he knew he would carry for the rest of his life. The transformation in John was not sudden, it was gradual. It's built from countless small interactions and observations. He began to see the beauty in simplicity, the importance of empathy, and the strength in authenticity. Where he had once sought attention and approval, he now sought understanding and growth. He discovered that real relationships were built not on appearance or reputation, but on shared experiences, mutual respect, and genuine connection. Living with Mia, he learned to value people for their character and actions rather than the shallow judgments of society. John also became more introspective, thinking about his own behavior, beliefs, and motivations. He realized how often he had conformed to peer pressure, laughed at others without reason, and ignored the depth of people around him. The week he had expected to endure as punishment had become an ongoing lesson in humility, empathy, and self-awareness. He started keeping a small journal himself, reflecting on his thoughts and experiences with Mia, noting the changes he was observing in himself. It was a practice that helped him internalize the lessons he was learning and recognize the growth he was undergoing as their days together continued. John and Mia developed a deep bond, not romantic, but one of trust, respect, and mutual understanding. They shared ideas, dreams, and frustrations, supporting each other in small but meaningful ways. Mia encouraged John to explore new interests, to slow down and appreciate the world around him, and to approach life with curiosity rather than judgment. In return, John offered help and companionship, learning that giving support without expectation could be deeply rewarding. Their relationship became a mirror, reflecting both their strengths and the areas where they could grow. One evening, after a long day working on the garden and creative projects, John paused to watch Mia quietly reading by the window. He thought about how much his perspective had changed since the day he first arrived. He had come with the intention of surviving a bet, expecting awkwardness and embarrassment, but he had found wisdom, insight, and a profound example of how to live a meaningful life. He realized that people were far more than the labels society placed on them, and that true value often lay hidden beneath layers of misunderstanding and prejudice. Mia's life, once mocked, had become a source of inspiration for him. By the end of his stay, John had transformed in ways he could not have imagined. He was more patient, observant, empathetic, and self-aware. He had learned the value of authenticity, the importance of resilience, and the power of quiet strength. The girl everyone mocked had not only taught him about life and people, but it also helped him discover a better version of himself. John understood that the lessons he had learned from Mia were far more important than winning or losing a bet as he prepared to leave. John felt a mix of gratitude, admiration, and reflection. He realized that his life would never be the same. The experience had opened his eyes to the limitations of shallow judgments and the richness that lay in understanding and appreciating the true character of people. Mia had changed him, not through force or persuasion, but through example, patience, and honesty. The girl everyone mocked had shown him that real growth comes from humility, empathy, the courage to see the world differently. John walked away from Mia's house that final day carrying more than memories. He carried a new perspective, a new sense of purpose, and a newfound respect for the depth of human character. The bet that had seemed like a challenge or even a punishment had turned into the most valuable experience of his life. He realized that the person he had once dismissed as weird had taught him lessons far beyond anything he could have imagined him, that understanding. Respect and genuine connection were the keys to true transformation. John left Mia's house with a strange mix of emotions. Relief, because he had completed the week without embarrassment. Gratitude, because of the lessons he had learned. And amazement, because he realized how much his life had changed in such a short time. What had begun as a simple bet, a moment of bravado and foolishness, had grown into an experience that had reshaped his understanding of people, relationships, and himself. Every step he took away from her home carried the weight of new insights, the kind that could not be unlearned, the kind that quietly shift who you are. Back in his own home and among his old friends, John noticed things immediately. The laughter, jokes, and teasing that once seemed so enjoyable now felt shallow. He realized how often he had laughed at others without understanding them, how often he had joined in mocking someone just to fit in. The town gossip about Mia now seemed cruel and unjust, and he felt a deep sense of shame for ever believing it. He understood that people are much more than what society labels them to be, and that judging someone without knowing their story is unfair and damaging. John's friends noticed a change in him too. He was no longer eager to dominate conversations or prove his courage. Instead, he listened more, asked questions, and showed empathy in ways they hadn't seen before. At first, some of them teased him for acting different, but John didn't mind. The shift within him was quiet but powerful. He had realized that real strength wasn't in showing off or being the loudest in the room, but in understanding, respecting, and supporting others. The lessons he had learned from Mia had become part of him, and he could no longer ignore them. One of the first things John did after returning to his usual environment was reflect deeply on his interactions with people. He thought about how often he had judged someone superficially, how often he had dismissed someone's potential because it didn't match what he expected. He realized that empathy and understanding were skills he needed to cultivate actively. Living with Mia had shown him that the world was full of people with untold stories, hidden talents, and quiet strengths. All that was required was a willingness to observe, listen, and care. John also began to apply the lessons he learned in practical ways. He reached out to classmates and colleagues he had previously overlooked, people who were quiet, misunderstood, or mocked. He listened to their stories, offered help, and treated them with the same respect and consideration Mia had shown him. To his surprise, this shift in attitude was noticed. People began to respond to him differently, not with fear or admiration based on his confidence, but with genuine warmth and connection. John realized that empathy and authenticity created bonds far stronger than bravado or shallow charm ever could. He also began reflecting on his own personal goals and ambitions. Before living with Mia, John had measured success in terms of popularity, recognition, and achievements that others could notice. Now, he valued effort, integrity, and personal growth over appearances. He started exploring new hobbies and interests with sincerity, not to impress anyone, but to truly enjoy the process and learn from it. Simple activities like helping others, creating small projects, or learning something new became sources of satisfaction that he had never experienced before. John's time with Mia had also changed how he viewed challenges. Before, he would have avoided situations that made him uncomfortable or vulnerable. Now, he understood that growth came from stepping into unknown territory, from experiencing life from different perspectives, and from facing discomfort with openness. He thought back to the moment he had arrived at Mia's house, feeling awkward and apprehensive, and realized that the lessons from that week had far surpassed anything he could have learned in his comfort zone. He had been transformed by living with someone different, by seeing life through her eyes. Another profound change was how John dealt with judgment and criticism. Before, he feared what others thought of him, often shaping his behavior to gain approval. Now, he recognized the futility of seeking validation from people who did not understand the real you. He admired Mia's quiet confidence, her ability to live authentically, regardless of societal opinions, and he began applying the same principle to his own life. He became less concerned about what others thought, more focused on being sincere, kind, and true to himself. John also carried with him a deeper understanding of resilience. Mia had lived through years of mockery, ridicule, and loneliness, yet she had remained undeterred, kind, and purposeful. Observing her strength firsthand, John realized that resilience was not about grand gestures of bravery or attention-seeking acts, but about quietly persisting, maintaining integrity, and living according to your values despite external pressures. This realization affected his approach to his own struggles, making him stronger, calmer, and more patient in the face of difficulties. As the weeks passed, John's friends and family began to notice a lasting transformation. He spoke differently, listened more attentively, and acted with a thoughtfulness that hadn't been there before. People found his presence calming and genuine, and many were inspired by the subtle but meaningful way he had changed. John himself noticed that he no longer sought the approval or laughter of the crowd, but rather the satisfaction of knowing he was acting with respect, kindness, And understanding, John never forgot Mia. He thought about her often, remembering the quiet strength, creativity, and insight she had shared with him. He realized that the girl everyone mocked had been teaching him the most important lessons of his life: to look beyond appearances, to value authenticity, to cultivate empathy, and to recognize the hidden strengths in others. The bet, which had seemed trivial and humorous at first, had given him a gift far greater than he could have imagined: a new way of seeing the world and a better understanding of himself. Over time, John began to share his experiences, not as a story of a bet, but as a lesson about empathy, understanding, and the value of seeing people for who they truly are. He encouraged others to question their assumptions, to treat everyone with respect, and to recognize that the world is richer when we look beyond superficial judgments. His words carried weight because they came from genuine experience, from a transformation he had lived, not just imagined. Looking back, John realized that living with Mia had been a turning point. It had reshaped his attitudes, relationships, and goals. He had entered her world expecting discomfort and awkwardness, but had emerged with wisdom, humility, and a renewed sense of purpose. The experience taught him that life's most meaningful lessons often come from unexpected places and from people we might initially misunderstand. Mia, the girl everyone mocked, had shown him the value of authenticity, empathy, and resilience, and through that, changed his life forever. John now approached life differently. He treated people with kindness, questioned his own biases, and embraced challenges as opportunities for growth. He no longer cared about shallow judgments or fleeting approval. Instead, he focused on understanding, learning, and living authentically. The lessons he had learned from Mia had become a part of who he was, guiding his actions, decisions, and relationships in every aspect of his life, even years later. John would reflect on that week as one of the most important experiences of his life. He knew that without the bet, he might never have met Mia, never discovered the depth of her character, and never learned the lessons that had so profoundly shaped him. The girl everyone mocked had taught him about life: empathy, courage, and resilience, not through words alone, but through her actions, her attitude, and the way she lived each day with dignity and authenticity. Ultimately, John realized that people are never what society labels them to be. Everyone has hidden depths, untold stories, and strengths that others may not recognize. Living with Mia had shown him that understanding, patience, and empathy could transform not only how you see others, but how you see yourself. The bet that once seemed like a simple challenge had become a journey of personal growth, self-discovery, and profound change. John carried that truth with him forever, knowing that meeting Mia and witnessing her life had made him a better, wiser, and more compassionate person.